I often lie awake at night, imagining answers to the question of reality. This hypnagogic state is where I do some of my best thinking, and it's probably where a lot of people do their best thinking as well. One night, not too long ago, an interesting idea struck me, and I felt compelled to write it down. But that first idea was really just a precursor to a more fleshed out and promising one that came about a week or two later. These ideas that I'm about to discuss in this video all fall under the category of what I would call brain theory. The idea that the universe either is a brain or is the imagination of a brain. The concept of Boltzmann brains is definitely an important part of brain theory, but it's not the only part. First, I'll explain the initial idea, then I'll explain what a Boltzmann brain is, and then I'll explain the enhanced theory. The universe is a brain. Call it the Overmind. Or perhaps it's even just a single cell in a brain. We already know that we're all made up of the same elements. We come from the same thing and go back to the same thing. We are all connected. This just takes that idea of connection a little further, or in a different direction. So you could say, we are the universe's imagination, or we are the universe imagining itself. We are a thought arising. Whether that thought consists of the entire universe available to us, our galaxy, or just our solar system, I suppose until we find extraterrestrial life, it doesn't matter. So then the idea is that each life form is a tiny electrical signal building on a synapse trying to fire. But a synapse must come to a decision before it can fire. It must pass along a piece of code. With this line of thinking, we are an ephemeral electrical impulse whose mission is to create a thought for our overmind. To this end, we must agree. When we finally agree, our message gets sent, and we go dark. Then, start up again for another one. A new creation of the universe. This time, entirely different. Zoom the camera out about a googolplex times, and you would see millions of synapses firing in rapid succession. What took a couple billion years for a single universe to achieve actually just took a nanosecond, and really was just one neuron in the brain that is ourselves. Really, you don't even need to assume that we have to agree on some universal idea. It could just be that the universe dies when it will, and it was all just part of the rich imagination of the Overmind, dreaming up an entire universe for fun, or just to pass the time. You've done it before. Perhaps not on such an impossibly large and cosmic scale, but you've still done it. Created a fictional universe for the fun of it. Imagined it for a while, lived in it even. Who's to say that the characters inside didn't have consciousness? In fact, in a certain manner of thinking, they must have had consciousness, because you are conscious, and those characters are just an extension of yourself. Anything they did was really just done by you. It was all taking place in your mind. Who's to say you didn't live a vibrant and fulfilling long life for each and every one of them, for the short amount of time you kept them in mind, and just didn't consciously realize it, or remember it? Who's to say that that's not what you are right now? A small figment of yourself, enjoying a quick flex of imagination, only to be largely forgotten, but then to ultimately become something much bigger and deeper than this current version of yourself that you identify with could ever comprehend. Does that sound improbable? I'm sure it does. So let's inject some probability into the idea. Ludwig Boltzmann was an Austrian physicist. He didn't come up with the idea of the Boltzmann brain, but the idea is based off of his theories. Boltzmann realized that while entropy increases, it does so on average. Even though entropy increases over time, low entropy events still happen. Imagine a room filled with particles. What do the particles do? They spread out to fill the room, but the particles continue to move around. In any given moment, the most likely outcome is for all the particles to be pretty evenly spread out. But at some moments, there will be parts of the room that are more densely packed than others, just due to the randomness of their movement. Even less likely, but still not impossible, is for every single particle in the room to be packed into one corner. They might even arrange themselves into an object, if only for an instant. Now, imagine this on a cosmic scale. Instead of a room, it's the universe. If there's an infinite timescale, then any non-impossible events will happen. At any moments, there's an incredibly minuscule possibility that scattered particles will join to create something complex, such as a human brain, preloaded with false memories and an illusion of existing in the world that we find ourselves in right now. Typically, the idea of a Boltzmann brain is seen from a solipsistic angle, that you are a Boltzmann brain and everything else is a delusion. Now it might seem more probable. So, for the final version of brain theory, let's take the concept of the Boltzmann brain and the universal brain and build on it. Let's imagine that instead of the universe being a brain whose mission is to form thoughts using our reality as one synapse of many, or a brain who's just entertaining itself, this brain, this overmind, is a Boltzmann brain, spontaneously formed out of cosmic dust, and we are all its imagination, just as fake as we are real. If the Overmind was a creation of happenstance, of loose particles drifting in the nothingness that just happened to form themselves into a functioning brain, as might happen once every couple googolplex years, not that years even mean anything to the void, or even exist, but if that's the case, and if the brain knows it's temporary, or even if it doesn't, wouldn't it have an incentive to keep itself alive, just as we do? It can't actually do anything to influence the world around it. It's just a brain, but it can prolong its experience subjectively. We are this overmind's consciousness, tunneling or spiraling further and further into smaller and more complex realities or segments of consciousness. If it keeps folding downward to deeper and deeper experiences, more and more imaginations, each one dreaming up the next one, then theoretically, it could live forever in an instant. It sets up an infinite loop for itself. Technically, this might crash the universe, just as an infinite loop crashes a computer. But the infinite loop would never really know if it is infinite. This could be what the Big Bang was. The universe exploding because of an error, like an overloading electric outlet with no breaker. Or perhaps the Big Bang was the surge of energy during the creation of consciousness. Or, like Boltzmann suggested, the Big Bang was a low entropy merging of particles in an otherwise high entropy universe. I don't know. This really isn't the place for answers. This is the place for questions. This spiraling of consciousness is an experience that can be had by your own brain on psychedelics. Whether it's only a truthful experience about psychedelics themselves or about the universe at large is certainly up for debate, and maybe an impossible problem to resolve. But still, the possibility of its truth and the taste of it one can get remain. While on something like LSD, you could get lost inside your own imagination, going down paths of fictional realities, a spiraling fracturing of your mind. Then you snap out of it and realize that these sub-realities are fictitious, and you manage to surface back up to the one you're accustomed to. But then a possibility arises. What if this reality you're accustomed to is just another sub-reality? If you could find a way to expand your consciousness, you'd find that the entire life you've lived was really just an imagined life, thought up over the course of a couple seconds by the life one layer above. And each mind in this reality creates at least one more sub-reality in the Overmind's infinite attempt to contract in on itself. Furthering that idea of infinite contraction, it's even possible that this same fracturing of consciousness to create another one is what happens when you die. Or the moment before you die, I should say. That in a final act of desperation, the brain creates its own sub-reality. One additional branch or spiral in the cosmic tree of consciousness. One last pulse of energy is spent to provide a subjective or internal eternity. This would mean that heaven and hell aren't just metaphors for the various possibilities of your limited existence, but actually literal eternities. Your own mind. Heaven or hell are facilitated by your mindset and your subconscious in the present moment and forever. Either way, heaven or hell, you're trapped in your own mind. A bonus about this theory is that it could very well fit into many other theories. It contains an explanation for a multiverse. After all, it's constantly fracturing, creating more universes and sub-realities. It contains an explanation for the universe being a simulation, though rather than being computer-made, it's imagination-made. It contains an explanation for past lives, or déjà vu. It contains an explanation for consciousness as a universal trait, or, to be more clear, as an external rather than an internal trait. Something that exists outside the body, or as a precursor to existence. It contains an explanation for the beginning of the universe, insofar as anything can. It can reconcile the ideas of Eastern religion and Western religion. Heaven and hell, alongside how everything is a piece of Brahman, or the supreme cosmic spirit. It contains an explanation for the oneness of all things, or of the unifying source. In this theory, that source is the deepest recesses of your own consciousness. So far, I've painted this theory with something of a negative valence. A desperate struggle for survival on the part of the Overmind. An ultimately doomed attempt at immortality. A sort of prison of the mind. But the same concept could be viewed from a more positive perspective. Instead of viewing the world as a prison, it could be viewed as a playground. This act of survival could instead be looked at as an act of self-expression. The Overmind's efforts to show the universe what it is, or show itself what it is, to decide what it is, which ties back into the very first version of the brain theory I offered in this video, that ultimately, existence is a decision. Note that while I do think this idea is tantalizing and compelling, and can often seem true, I ultimately don't put much stock in it. It does seem that the materialist viewpoint is the most parsimonious, and the most likely to be true. That the universe exists as science believes it to, and created everything through accident and evolution. But every once in a while, it can seem like there's something else going on. Something unexplained. Something difficult to describe or even fully ascertain. Something not currently accounted for by the materialist perspective. And then theories such as these manage to satisfy an unspoken suspicion that the numbers don't quite add up, that things aren't quite right. And if you don't feel that, then at the very least, it's something interesting to think about. Something to practice your mind on, to keep it a bit more open than it likes to be.